in my days as a communications manager in my previous life, one of the things I used to always say when there was a crisis, when there's something going on, my theme was always misinformation will fill a vacuum. So let's just get some information out, even if all we're doing is standing up and telling the organization, we don't have any updates for you. We're still telling them something instead of staying quiet. So when I retired from corporate and I moved into therapy work and all of this, I reread something I'd written and I thought, misinformation does fill a vacuum. So why am I being so quiet about the whole childlessness thing and the infertility journey and all the rest of it? So that was sort of a catalyst for me to find my voice again and just go, okay, no, I want to control the narrative around what my truth is and how can I work with other women to give them or facilitate the courage for them to do that as well. And that's been quite an interesting journey because so many women just don't want to talk. It's like, no, I'm just going to keep quiet, let people believe what they want to believe. Yeah, that's a choice. But how does that make you feel? And it's always, I feel like, it's that point of, okay, we've lost our voice. What do we need to do to reclaim it? So, again, we go back to the theme of International Women's Day, encourage, empower. How do we do that? How do we help other women do that? And Michael, how can men play their role in helping women do that?
Hello, and welcome to the Full Stop Podcast, a childless community podcast with Michael Hughes, Berenice Smith, and me, Sarah Lawrence. If you're new to this podcast, we're here to delve beneath the surface of the childless identity, to cover what's going on in the wider community and to look at the topics that really affect us. Our goal is to help and support those of you out in the community by sharing the stories and the voices that make up our narrative, so that you too can begin to find yours. We also aim to inform and educate those who aren't members of our community so that they can begin to understand and support those people in their lives who are facing a life without children. In this episode, we're joined by Anne Xavier Altamore, a counsellor, psychotherapist and founder of Life After IVF. Anne is also a World Childless Week ambassador and passionate speaker when it comes to advocating for childlessness. This is a very engaging episode where Anne speaks passionately about why we need to have room at the table when it comes to International Women's Day. So sit back, relax and enjoy this episode all about how we can find our place at that table.
Welcome to the Full Stop Podcast, Anne. It's lovely to have you with us. For the benefit of our listeners who may not have met you, could you just explain a little bit more about what you do, please? Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Anne and I live in Melbourne, Australia. So firstly, I would like to just acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm coming to you from, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and future. So I have two roles in my life. For work, I run private practice, working with people who are childless not by choice. And I also work as a bereavement support worker for a charity, working with people who have lost children. So there's two kind of demographics I work with, the parents, lost parents, and also people who are childless not by choice. And in my spare time, I work with a couple of volunteer groups. I am fur mum to two adorable Havanese who are my pride and joy. And I'm just about to start looking for some new hobbies. So if anyone's got any ideas, I'm all ears.
Oh, don't ask me, Anne, because all my hobbies involve mess. I think I long to be able to knit because it's tidier than having a shed full of print things and stuff like that. And certainly thinking pottery might be a thought, but it's messy. I'm not allowed. I've been banned from
You could paint pottery.
Yeah, I paint anyway, but that, again, it's kind of something that I could sit on the sofa and do. And it's lovely to have you with us because I feel like I've known you from social media for a long time, and to acknowledge that one of the things that I think you do so brilliantly is to appear on places where we might not think about talking about childlessness, like LinkedIn. I'm forever applauding and loving the work that you do there, because I think it's important to share that narrative a bit wider than perhaps our own circle, if you like, and where sometimes we might feel comfortable to do so, but to go a bit further out and to talk about it with other people. And it sounds very much like you do that in your work.
I do. Actually, getting onto LinkedIn to talk about childlessness was really, really scary to start with, because, that was exposing what I felt was a really private part of my life. And then I realized I'm talking about it on my Instagram and part of World Childless Week and all the rest of it anyway. And I think what gave me the courage was there were a couple of situations at work where a work meeting got hijacked. And it was all about being a mother and childhood and all the rest of it. And I noticed, I was getting very triggered. And then I noticed a few people sitting there feeling really uncomfortable. And so I thought, well, I'm not going to say anything here, but I'm just going to put a feeler out on LinkedIn. And so I did a post on psychosocial safety around meetings and, how we need to be really careful. And I got so much response from that. And it made me realize that, we've got this saying, we take our whole selves to work and we take our whole selves home. And that applies to every area of our lives. Yes, we celebrate being parents. We, encourage people to be full-on parents and get that right work-life balance. But at the same time, I think there's also a really huge need to be sensitive around the people who are struggling. Somebody could be sending out, and we've talked about this in many other forums, somebody sends out a email everyone with an ultrasound of their pregnancy or their wife's pregnancy. And in the cubicle right next to them, there could be somebody who's just found out that their latest IVF cycle didn't work, or a grandparent who's just found out that they're never going to have grandchildren because for whatever reason, their children have not been able to have children or decided not to. Yeah, so I think that's kind of one of the things I've become quite passionate about, just sort of raising that awareness, but trying to do it very subtly so I don't sound like, I'm kind of beating my own drum. But then again, sometimes I think we have to be heard because we're a silent demographic still.
I think it can feel like that with LinkedIn, can't it? I've spoken about it and I share the full stop stuff on my things, but I'm very conscious that it's my sort of space. And sometimes it can feel, I think, particularly on other networks, a little bit exposing. But generally, I found LinkedIn to be quite supportive. People can be a little more professional there, I think. But yeah, I absolutely tune into that kind of that feeling of exposure. I use it a lot as a platform, and it can feel a bit soul bearing sometimes. And getting the balance right can be quite hard. But it's just getting that meeting in the middle, as we were talking before Michael hit record, about meeting in the middle and sharing, I think, some of the similarities, I think, as well. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I think it's also important to also get the message out that we're not being anti-mum or, we're not being anti-parents. When we say or when we voice that something is triggering for us, we're stating our truth and we're asking for a little bit of kindness. We're not saying, don't talk about your kids. We're just saying be a little bit more sensitive.
Absolutely that, yeah. It feels sometimes, I think maybe it's history. I don't know. I know when I've looked at the historical kind of stuff around childlessness and some of the ways that women were treated, and we all probably know enough about that to not want to go back there, but might give some people in the world ideas. I feel like we can be so misjudged, and that kind of segues probably quite nicely into International Women's Day. And to quote Jodie Day's fabulous statement that it's not International Mother's Day, and making sure that we're seen in that narrative as well. I think that's quite important, that we stand up and we have that voice together.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and it's not often. It's certainly in the UK, and we were talking before we hit record, was that International Women's Day falls just before Mother's Day. So the whole month of March can feel hideous. I don't know if you feel like that, Sarah. It feels like it's a bit of an avalanche. Yeah, it can be a bit much.
It starts at Christmas, doesn't it? And then it snowballs through January, February, and then into March, I think.
Yeah. As soon as Valentine's Day's finished, it's then kind of like, hey, let's celebrate motherhood. And it's like, P.S. His International Women's Day. And the theme for this year with the United Nations is inspire all women and all girls. And it feels like that's something that's very critical and central to your work.
Yes, in addition to working with women to redefine, and men too, actually, to redefine what their life is like after they finish with their fertility journey. That whole concept of we are people, we're humans, we're women, we're men, we're, not parents, or for people who identify as lost parents, they're lost parents. But the other thing I've also been involved in is a charity that runs a fundraiser very close to International Women's Day. And the whole idea was the brainchild of a very dear friend of mine who decided that we need to raise awareness about what it means to be a woman or identify as a woman and live authentically. So that's kind of the theme of what we do. And so every year what happens is, it's interestingly enough, it's a little bit of a fashion show, because the idea came from the International Fashion Week, Melbourne Fashion Week. But instead of being called models, all the women who participate are called role models. And everyone has a story of a triumph over adversity or a challenge or just living their authentic life. And interestingly, we have a mix of mothers and non-mothers in that group. And the key message that comes across from everybody is women are so much more than just one role or one stereotype. And it's been really empowering watching people go through. So we're in our 5th year now, but I think messages like that are so important around we are women and we have so much to give. We have so much wisdom and knowledge and kindness and compassion that we can share. Why do we get pegged into one little stereotype? And to me, it seems like the last few years, more and more International Women's Day seems to have become another Mother's Day.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of go, well, what happened to honoring and celebrating women and not just mothers? That's kind of my big question. I think I was talking to Sarah. I had 2 very strong grandmothers, both of whom worked from the time they were teenagers to retirement. One of them from choice, one of them by necessity. One had 10 children and then adopted an abandoned child. So she brought up 11 children with no help. The other one had 4. But the key message they both instilled in me from a very young age is you're so much more than one thing in your life. Motherhood is great and it's fantastic. And if that's what happens, that's fantastic. But if it doesn't, there's also so much more that you can do with your life. And, they were both very religious. So, they always said it's your responsibility to explore your options and live the fullest life you can that God has given you. So as I was reflecting on that, I was thinking, I think that kind of really helped me a lot with coming to terms with being childless, because as sad as it's been at the start, and I've done all my grief work, now I kind of remember what my grandmother said, and I go, yeah, you're right. That's just one part of a big jigsaw puzzle. It's a missing piece. There's still a gazillion other pieces that can fit together. So one of the things I'm very passionate about doing is actually working with women to kind of help them see that and kind of work out how they can live fully and authentically with or without having children.
And can I take you back to the role model organisation event you talked about? How can people find out more about this? If it's sparking their interest,
yeah.
What's it actually called? What's the website?
It's called This Is Me, and it is advertised on Facebook. They've just started advertising. It's either !S is me, 3 words, or it's This Is Me. I can't remember. I can send you the link later.
Yeah, we'll definitely put that in our show notes. Absolutely. I'm just trying to do Google because I remember the photograph that you shared. It might have been 2 years ago, maybe a year ago. I can't.
Was it the one about the grief monsters?
I think it was.
I like I like your donuts, the donuts and sparkling your donuts on your blog. I read that and thought, I really could get into the donuts.
Yes, I'll always be a donut, but I can decorate that donut and have a great time. Yeah,
and I think that because it's reclaiming, isn't it? And I like that. Yeah,
that's exactly what it was. And it was literally, I was sitting there looking at a Krispy Kreme and going, yeah, that's got a big, huge hole in it, but gee, it's still yummy. It doesn't take away from it. And I did some research on donuts, and I was like, okay, that sounds interesting. But yeah, what Michael was talking about was 2 years ago, a friend of mine who is also childless, not by choice, did a choreography dance piece around grief and triumphing over grief. And that was part of This Is Me. So I was one of the grief monsters that kind of attacked her and, made her life a bit miserable. And then it was all about how she overcame all of that. So it was a lot of fun.
I love that. It sounds like you've got a very vivid imagination, and that works really well in terms of your work.
I try.
And I mean that with absolute respect as well.
Thank you.
I think sometimes, I appreciate that, because I think it's just from the point of view of being a creative and an artist as well, that sometimes it's trying to visualising grief can feel really important. And Sarah, you talk a lot about that in your work as well, about seeing grief and different ways of addressing it, and you're better placed to talk about that. But it feels like that's something that's really important to you.
Yeah, and to be honest, I've learned that a lot from my clients, when we work with them and we talk about things like anxiety and sadness and grief. And usually when I say, okay, tell me what this is like. And a lot of them will create an image. So, one person I spoke to talked about using the characters from Monsters, Inc., the animated Pixar. And he visualizes his different emotions. And this was way before the... what was that show? There's a Pixar show about feelings. The name skips me now. Inside Out. Yeah, it was long before that one came out. And I thought, that's actually a really interesting way of looking at grief. And I think also with childless grief, which is my area of work, it's very hard to tangibilize it. Because what do you tangibilize? Or for somebody who has never been pregnant or who had a very early loss like me, there's nothing tangible to hold on to. So it's like, well, yes, I'm grieving and I miss the children who weren't born, but how do I actually make that tangible? So I think that's kind of why I've gone down a little bit down the imagination and creating images that other people, I hope, resonate with.
Yeah, it kind of feels like, I was just thinking when you were talking about perhaps how maybe the reason we don't get perhaps a fair seat at the table, if you like, for International Women's Day, perhaps it is that discomfort. People don't really want to kind of go there, or maybe it's reductive. It's kind of hard to see it from our side, I think, when you sort of go across into sort of other people, where other people exist. I don't know, parents, child free maybe as well. Again, I think there's more in common, that we have more in common with them, but it's really hard to sort of go, okay, International Women's Day and all women together, and to try and view it in a different way to us. I think I've been in the childless space for too long to know quite where the blockers are for other people in terms of allowing us to be seen and heard. But I suspect it might just be discomfort and having to go to places that they don't necessarily want to go to themselves, because there's nothing to feel. Help me here. I don't really quite know where I'm going, Sarah.
No, I think
Sarah, you're better. Sarah's so much better at this than I am, because she can say it in an incisive sentence. But it's a kind of lostness in the middle, a hinterland, and we talked about it on the previous episode. I know I didn't come to that, but it was that kind of hinterland in the middle of kind of not seeing it from all sides. And it's a much bigger spectrum. Being a woman is so much more than just having children.
I wonder also how much of it is a marketing gimmick, because it's easy to target mothers. right?
Yeah,
Like
true.
it is,
Good point.
it's a stereotype to a certain extent. It's easy to pull the emotional card with the husbands and the partners and the children, and it's International Women's Day, but let's target mum. So it's easy for people to do the gifting and the afternoon teas and whatever else people do. Whereas, how do you target a childless person without celebrating them as a whole person? Which I wonder how many people feel actually comfortable doing that, like you just said, Berenice.
Yeah, I think that's it. I also just wanted actually a nice sort of segue to something that people might be thinking, but I thought that International Women's Day was called Accelerate Action, and there is another theme out there, but it's run by a commercial company called Aurora Ventures, who have had sponsors from people who do arms dealing, things like that. There is a Medium post that I will share in our show notes about the trouble with the other International Women's Day, because that is very much around commercialism, and they sell things that you can buy and claim that it's for charity, and actually the United Nations is the one that's the less commercial. But as you say, a lot of companies can pick up on that and make an awful lot of money from it too, and commercialise what it means to be a woman, which is unfortunate, as if we haven't had enough of that in our lives already. It's another one. I don't see that much stuff around things like that on International Men's Day. Michael, do you get a lot of stuff? Are you aware of that with International Men's Day, of stickers and buying T-shirts and things? And maybe, I don't know, it's also perhaps a need in terms of gender recognition, but I don't know.
No, the last International Men's Day, I actually sent some key men that I know messages around, I see you as one of my role models in life. And it was quite interesting because they were shocked. They didn't know it was International Men's Day. They had absolutely, because I think the theme of the year may have been role models or something to do with role models, and no one knew anything about it. And I think that's what International Men's Day is. There's a lot of apathy around it.
Yeah.
What do you think that is? Why do you think there's this apathy around it?
I think there's I don't know, to be quite honest, but I think it's more about, look, if I speak from my behalf, I sometimes think you just don't want to put your head above the trench. As a white middle-aged man, look, I try my very hardest to be a good role model, but as a white middle-aged man, I don't get into. It's just this is challenging for me to talk about, but I just don't. I don't want to put my head above the trench, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Because I understand. I have a lot of privilege, absolutely. I don't know what to do with that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. Yeah. Yeah, it does.
And so, but this is not about me. This is International Women's Day, and what I would like to know is, what is it that you want me to know about this year's theme, personally know about this year's theme of International Women's Day? What is it you want me to know?
You ask some good questions, don't you, Mr. Hughes? You're on fire today. Oh, I think allyship and standing up for people. Can I have a rant? Am I allowed a mini rant? Which is the International Women's Day. And I think it's so important, Anne, what you've just said as well about the commercialisation of it. It's just that International Women's Day started actually in 1911. And yet we still have issues where there is a huge gender inequality in pay. Certainly, I think the narrative around women is incredibly challenged worldwide at the moment. And I think the best thing that any man can do is actually to be an ally and to stand up for women's rights when they see that challenge. And that can just be like, excuse me, but you're wrong. Or it could be, you need to check what you're saying. I think because that's where it can be really hard. I think I've worked in many companies and my family, very lovely, but again, it's quite male dominated. And I've certainly been in workplaces as well, certainly in printing, where I'm the only woman in the building. And it can feel very intimidating. I can hold my own in most situations, but there are just days when it's exhausting. It's a phrase I'm going to quote you, Michael, anyway, which is that banter can very quickly become bullish, but I think with women it can become sexist. We're certainly seeing it a lot, I think, in the media now, where famous guys are being called out, like you've been harassing women, and actually a lot of women are turning around, oh no, they were just being friendly. No, that's unacceptable, and why do they wait so long to complain? Those sorts of comments, I think, can be really demeaning and diminishing to other women, and I think there's an awful lot around women lifting other women up that needs to happen more as well. And I know that's a bit controversial, but I think that also is a thing too. So yeah, I think being an ally to women and to recognise all women, I think, is really important, because 1911 to now, and still not having gender equality in pay and rights across the world, I think is really actually quite shit. And there really shouldn't be a need for International Women's Day. That's me getting off my soapbox now. I'm clambering down. It's quite a long drop, but there we go. Anne, can I invite you to speak rather than me rant on?
Well,
you're our guest.
I think allyship is a fantastic place to start. And I would like to add to that, encourage and empower as well. I have been very blessed to have had some fantastic mentors in work when I used to be in a corporate role. And they were all men, actually. And they were very, I remember my very first job was as a PR and events manager. 26, straight out of uni, terrified. That was, that is the apt description. I can admit to that now. First major event. And I was terrified that everything that could go wrong would. Nothing did. It was perfect. But there were 3 men. It was an international company. So there were 3 VPs from 3 different parts of the world. And I remember them taking me aside and going, firstly, breathe. Secondly, stop panicking. And they said, thirdly, just remember that the first time you do everything, you're going to be really nervous, but you just need to teach those nerves to fly, teach those butterflies to fly in a straight line, and we're here to back you up. We're your safety net. Now, for a terrified 26-year-old, hearing 3 men say, we're your safety net, was so encouraging. And it was a 3-day event. It went really smoothly. Until today, I don't know how much they picked up that I dropped. But I know that just having that tiny little conversation with them really helped. So that was encouragement and empowerment. And there have been so many other examples like that throughout my career where I've had mentors who've been people in management. But outside of the work outside of the workspace, it's also, just being a good role model to women and girls. Like that whole, one of the things we were talking about the other day in another group I was in was how we differentiate when a little boy cries. We say, stop crying, get up, dust it off. When a little girl cries, it's, oh, my darling princess, are you okay? Oh, is everything all right? What message are we sending? That kind of differentiation starts there and then. So this was actually with a group of parents, this conversation. And what the dads were saying was treating both boys and girls the same when it comes to, if a boy cries, it's like, it's okay to cry. Tell me where it hurts or tell me what's going on. And with the girl, it's the same thing. Or if you're going to get both of them to ride their BMX bike up a hill, give them both the same encouragement to do that. So I think kind of that's my soapbox. Treat them, give them equal encouragement, equal enablement, equal empowerment. And that starts from very, very young.
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to take a different tack, actually, in answer to your question, Michael.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are places where men need to check their privilege, especially when it comes to women's reproductive rights. There's a lot going on in America at the moment. I won't get political, but we're seeing some of it come over here. And it's finding it alarming that white, upper class, middle class men are commenting on women's sexual reproductive rights. And actually, I think sometimes I love men to bits. I love being around them. But I think sometimes they need to know there are places that they don't have the knowledge or or the wisdom to really comment on. And women's reproductive rights for me are very important. I think I would hate for women that come after me to have less reproductive rights than me. And it's taken us such a long time to get them in the first place that it would be a real shame to see that go backwards. It's something that really, really makes me very angry to see some of what's being said around this issue and the almost demonisation of women again. We used to get burnt as witches. Now we're getting hauled over the coals for reproductive rights and getting blamed for the falling birth rate, which is not our fault. You know, we can make the same decisions as men around whether we want to have children or not. And I would hate for us to go backwards on that one. That's not for every man. This is aimed at men in power, really. I think that they have a right to comment on what we're allowed to do with our bodies. So yeah, that's my soapbox, and I am going to clamber down now off of mine. But I think it would be such a shame to go backwards on that.
If the topic in this episode chimes with you, you can get in touch with us on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Blue Sky. We appreciate your feedback. Childless Not by Choice listeners can carry on the conversation with us in our safe space at the Full Stop online community. For more details on how to join and to claim a free month's trial on us, please visit www.thefullstoppod.com. We extend a huge thanks to the current members of our amazing online community, and it's because of them that we can keep the lights on for the podcast and look forward to giving back to the childless community as we grow. There's a really awful fact that I was reading around this, because I do work in gender balance. That's one of the things that I do a little bit of here and there. And it was that at the current rate we're going, we need 99.5 years of work to bring women into the equity worldwide. That is the same equality as men, 99.5. And this is, as I say, been going on since 1911. Yeah, that's quite sobering. So I think that the idea of Happy International Women's Day is something I find sticks in my throat a lot. Because sometimes some of the work, I think, in gender balance can often, and I go back to kind of why we're talking here about all women and empowering all women and all girls, it can often be around sometimes divisive and taking some rights away from some women to give them to others, and moving it and mixing it around a bit, when actually there are so many challenges worldwide. It's making me quite emotional talking about it as well. You know, I'm digressing slightly, but I was watching, there's a drama series in the UK called Miss Austen, and it's about Cassandra Austen, Jane Austen's elder sister, who's been largely derided for burning Jane Austen's letters. Academics throughout the years have gone, she shouldn't burn them. And one of the reasons they believe she burnt them was because Jane Austen suffered from quite severe depression. Of course, one didn't talk about these things. And it was that whole issue that I don't think comes out enough. You know, you have Pride and Prejudice, comes onto television, Colin Firth coming out of the lake in his shirt. And actually one of the biggest themes about Pride and Prejudice is primogeniture, and the fact that women were just thrown out of the houses they'd known all their lives so that some man somewhere, distant cousin, could inherit the house, which is kind of what happened to all of the Bennet family. And this need to be married to somebody, whether you like them or not. Mr. Collins, the odious Mr. Collins. And it's just like, that's the point of her story, is actually that women have nowhere to go. And in fact, it's one of the things that is all the way through Miss Austen, is that they're trying to find somewhere to live because the men come in, and women, I don't know how much truth there is in it, but the sister-in-law, Mary Austen, is socially climbing her way up and taking other women's stuff because she has children, and because, of course, Jane Austen, Cassandra Austen don't have children. They're single, unmarried sisters who have absolutely no say at all. And the interesting thing about the series, about this drama, is that they start from when they're younger, in their 30s. In fact, Jane Austen says at one point that she's got to 30 and has nothing to show for it, and that's the first time I think her novel Susan is not published by the publisher, and he pays her £10, which is nothing compared to the money that her brothers have. And they show them as adults. Cassandra often as an older woman, and it's still the same. She's having to find somewhere else to live for her niece, so her niece has nowhere to live because her father died, and there's nobody else to inherit the house, so she has to find another place to go. So it's all kind of like I call it like the Colin Firth wet shirt syndrome, where that becomes the thing, but there's so much more that's neglected, that isn't being heard, because again, it's a guy in a shirt in a lake takes the thing, and it's very nice. I mean, I'm not going to object to Colin Firth in a shirt, but let's just acknowledge all the other things going on here as well. It's a much more serious theme, yeah. And the fact that I think Jane Austen was published as a lady as well. There's an awful lot in literature about that. Again, I'm soapboxing again, but I just think that, you know, when we talk about gender balance now, when we're seeing some things on television and in literature as well, it's important to just sort of go into those themes, I think, a bit deeper as well. So I've gone off on a tangent, but yeah, it's not, to me, Happy International Women's Day at all. I find that quite a shocking thing to say.
But, you know, that theme of you need to have a husband and children to be able to have financial security, that is still widespread in a lot of cultures and a lot of demographics, not just cultures, a lot of demographics as well. You know, and again, how long have women been fighting for their rights to be recognized? It's 2025.
Yeah.
And we're
Childless
still
cat ladies.
Yep. That's right. Yep. That's one of them. Beware the divorcee. That's another one that the theme goes.
Yeah.
Don't invite infertile women to a wedding because they'll bring bad luck.
Yes.
What else is there?
Oh, we used to have our bricks tied to our feet, actually. I don't know if anyone knew this, but in churches in England, if you were childless, there is evidence that women had bricks tied to their feet and had to walk up the aisle. If you didn't have children, you were childless. So just to make sure everyone in the church knew that you were childless.
Knew that?
Yeah. It's... Yeah, and also just, I think, current myth as well. I've said this a couple of times in different spaces, and probably far too much than I'd like to, and it worries me that I have, but it's the fact that childless now feels like a weaponized word. I mean, it has been anyway, I think, throughout history, but it particularly feels weaponized at the moment and during last year. And again, trying not to be political, but it does very much feel like that right now. That we are becoming a place where blame can be laid through no fault of our own, and those boundaries can create silos. Because I think we're easily suppressed by not being able to share our stories.
Yeah. And I wonder, and this is me just thinking off the top of my head, I wonder if that's because when you're working with a couple, regardless of where I work with infertility, regardless of where the infertility is coming from, it's always the woman who takes the blame.
Yes.
You know, it's the woman who takes the shame and the blame, the woman who carries the guilt. The woman is the first one that's blamed. And a lot of women stay quiet about it. They don't say anything. They just be quiet. So they become an easy target. And I wonder if that's one of the reasons that it's so easy to go, you know, let's just blame the childless woman for everything.
Yeah. And it becomes that kind of thing where you can say, oh, well, you didn't meet anyone in time, or you didn't, or you. People can make lots of fill in the gaps and tell their own, you know, build your own story here. But actually, and it really is a story, it's not actually the truth.
No.
Yeah.
I had, when I was going through IVF, I also had a fairly senior position, and one of my colleagues was on the same path. And the comments we used to get, you know, you've forgotten to have children, have you? And it was like, yeah, we have. We're too busy with our careers. Yeah. But, you know, again, that assumption that it was something you had to do and you forgot.
Yeah. It's ridiculous, isn't it? It's build your own. People just fill in the gaps in some very kind of strange way because it's too scary to probably ask what's going on, or an invasion of privacy. Although I think some people do kind of overstep that line as well. Those boundaries can be crossed. I know I've certainly had incidences where I've been I've had random men say that they'd father my children for me. And my, apart from the insult and outrage over that, it's kind of, well, how do you know that you're fertile, actually? I mean, you're making a massive assumption about yourself. It's just really, really unfair to have that. And I've been certainly in positions where I was going through IVF and I got demoted because I was going through IVF and the guy got my job. He actually lasted 3 weeks and left and I got my job back. But it was only because he left that I got my job back, which is the bit that is just, a little bit, that's wrong. In many, many ways, very, very wrong. Yeah.
I was wondering, Anne, if I could double back on something you were talking about earlier about us not really being invited to the party, as it were, to take our place at the table. We've talked a lot, haven't we? We've sort of said a few things, and it strikes me that actually it's difficult, I think, as women to take up space and to feel like we're on an equal footing sometimes. But that comment that we were just talking around as childless women and perhaps women carrying more of the shame than perhaps is reasonable to. Do you think that plays into us not wanting to step up, that's not the right word, but not being able to or not feeling able to? Do you think that all comes together in that perfect storm?
I think so. And I also wonder whether that even starts when we're little. Girls are meant to be quiet and demure and behave themselves, but boys can run around and be rowdy and noisy. It definitely was that way when I was growing up. So again, where is our voice? When do we start having a platform or having the courage to have our voice? So again, I was very blessed. I went to an all-girls this was in the 70s. I was in primary school, 80s, I was in secondary, and I had a whole lot of very feminist teachers and nuns. So, two very strong grandmothers, feminist teachers. We had this great message of the world is your oyster, use your voice, stand up for yourself. And I think we did to a certain extent, but then we went out into the real world and realized we were such a tiny minority. The real world doesn't treat you like that. And a lot of us became quiet. Some of us didn't. Some of us kind of got onto soapboxes, but we also became quite quiet. So again, that whole thing of when do we get the courage to have our voice? Who are the people that we can seek mentorship from? Who are the people who can encourage and enable and empower us? Those are kind of the themes I'd like to see coming up around International Women's Day. If we're talking about encouraging and empowering women, let's start as early as possible. And let's look for those role models. Let's encourage people who have that voice, who have the courage to actually start speaking their truth. Does that sort of answer your question, Sarah?
Yeah, 100%.
Or if I got off on a tangent?
No, not at all. 100% you're on it.
I think it's a really interesting question and a really interesting answer, because when you were talking about your grandmothers, I could empathise with that, because my grandmother brought up 4 children, probably pretty much brought up most of her grandchildren on and off over the years, and ran a business, was involved in the parish councils, did an awful lot of stuff, considered herself largely unemployable, so she set up her own business. So I can see a parallel, I think, with what I do, because she was very much a very strong person, I think, in that sense. So we had matriarchs in our family. My great-grandmother was the matriarch. And it's, as you say, it's keeping that going. And I feel, and I don't know how true it is, and I can't ask her anymore because sadly she passed away a few years ago, but it felt to me that my grandmother sometimes was almost told she was doing too much, or wasn't perhaps the traditional grandmother, and not failed in that sense, but there was a narrative around that is worrying, because, and it ties into what you said, Anne, in that, we can start off somewhere and be empowered in some way, but we can some point get suppressed. I think for me it was kind of like being told that, oh, you need to have secretarial training and you can't be creative because there isn't any jobs for you in creativity, and it's not a real job anyway. So being a creative, being a girl and being told you have to have secretarial exams. I will say that actually knowing how to touch type is actually a really good life skill. But at the time, it really, really wasn't what I wanted to do. And I could see that I would end up probably doing something like that. And that's a fantastic career in its own. But when you've got other stuff you want to do and you're being told you can't do it because actually it's a man's world, then that's really a form of suppression. Being, I think, mindful of that seems so important. That there can be little microaggressions, I think, in terms of sort of, triggers and emotions, but it's almost like micro suppressions that become bigger suppressions over the years, and that narrative can feed in, and we get kind of worried about perhaps speaking out. I suspect maybe that's something that also happens maybe with childlessness, and that sense of failure and worthlessness that we can often feel from society at large as well. Yeah. I think there's I'm not the expert in any of this, I defer to other people on that, but it feels like there's just like a whole maelstrom of narratives there that we're all having to come out from under. And on some days, I really am utterly sick of childlessness, in the sense that I just don't want to mention the word. I like a day off, please. It's not the emotion of it and what I am, but actually it's the word. I don't really want to talk about it. I don't even want to mention it. I started to call it like the C word now, because I don't want to talk about it, because it's not the sum total of who I am. I'm so many more things, and then I am childless. But that's comes from an awful lot of soul searching. So it's like an ever-changing sort of maelstrom of labelling, I suppose, maybe, and narratives that sometimes are forced on us, not through our own choice. I ranted again, didn't I? I got on another soapbox.
No,
halfway.
But it's so true, though. I think a lot of us get really tired, and then we succumb to the narratives that are being thrown at us. And then it's like, I don't have the energy to fight this. So yeah, whatever. I'll just go with the flow and I'll just be quiet. And we lose our voice. I know I did for a very long time, because it was just too tiring. And then I got old and I thought, I don't care anymore. So I'm back on my soapboxes now. But there was a very long time where I was very quiet because it was all just too hard.
Yeah. It's that thing, isn't it? When you get older, it's like, fuck it, whatever. I kind of do feel a bit like that. Yeah,
it is a bit.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and I've noticed. I'm just observing that actually, and Sarah, I think you and I both did the same. We were like, better get off the soapbox now, and I think we've all done that. And it's just like, I suspect that Michael wouldn't apologise for getting off the soapbox. I think I apologise. I'm apologising about a soapbox. Hell, it's our podcast. Why am I doing that? But I think that's like a thing. I'm like, Jesus, stop doing that. Because actually this is the whole point of having the conversation as well. But I'm observing that in my own, even now, I'm sitting going, I'm aging and fuck it. But oh my goodness me, I'm conscious that I'm not as comfortable with that, and that's really interesting as well. So yeah, one to reflect on perhaps as well. Yeah,
I think it's so true though. I work with a lot of women, and it's encouraging women to take up space, and tell their stories, find their words. It's kind of, that's how it starts, isn't it? If we don't have our words or our stories, then we're silent. And we were talking about this in the last episode, weren't we? The big old silent spaces that we don't fill with stories, or our words, or our feelings. And I think you're so right when you say, I think, Anne, you said it, didn't you? We're brought up as sugar and spice and all things nice for women, isn't it? You've got to be compliant. You've got to be, people-pleasing almost. And I think if you're going to be an activist, then that's the polar opposite, isn't it? You're not being quiet. You're not going to shut up. You are going to say your piece. And I think it can feel counterintuitive for women.
In my days as a communications manager in my previous life, one of the things I used to always say when there was a crisis, when there's something going on, my theme was always, misinformation will fill a vacuum. So let's just get some information out, even if all we're doing is standing up and telling the organization, we don't have any updates for you. We're still telling them something instead of staying quiet. So when I retired from corporate and I moved into therapy work and all of this, I reread something I'd written and I thought, misinformation does fill a vacuum. So why am I being so quiet about the whole childlessness thing and the infertility journey and all the rest of it. So that was sort of a catalyst for me to find my voice again and just go, okay, no, I want to control the narrative around what my truth is, and how can I work with other women to give them or facilitate the courage for them to do that as well. And that's been quite an interesting journey, because so many women just don't want to talk. It's like, no, I'm just going to keep quiet, let people believe what they want to believe. Yeah, that's a choice. But how does that make you feel? And it's always, I feel like, it's that point of, okay, we've lost our voice. What do we need to do to reclaim it? So, again, we go back to the theme of International Women's Day, encourage, empower. How do we do that? How do we help other women do that? And Michael, how can men play their role in helping women do that?
Yeah, don't have the answer to it.
But something to think about.
Oh, absolutely.
I would suggest that
absolutely.
For me, it's about men, perhaps even just on International Women's Day, going out, reading some stuff, sharing the hell out of stuff they agree with that was written by women. Actually, that's a really simple act that doesn't cost much in the way of time, but can actually create learning for them by reading the post and seeing what it is, the messages out there, and then sharing it so another man learns and somebody else learns, and so on and so on and so on. An awful lot of mistruths get shared on social media, but actually I think collectively everyone can share better things, better quality things, and choose and learn from that and actually make them better places to hang out in. I think that's a really easy act, and one that we encourage in the Gender Balance Network. We ask colleagues and men that we work with to do that, actively do that, not just on International Women's Day, but always, but particularly on International Women's Day, to do that, just if that's a helpful thing to share at this point.
There is something I do want to share when you said, how can men help, Ed? And I just realised that one way I try to do it is, so I'm coming close to retirement. So superannuation for me is a big thing. It's a thing for Vicky and I. We talk about it quite a lot, as I'm sure you can imagine, as that retirement date creeps up. But one of the things that it's actually highlighted is that we would probably be a typical couple, because I know the stats on this, that she has 1/4 of what I have in my super. Mm-hmm. And so I take this with me every time I go to work and meet young women, because the organisation I work in does have a lot of particularly young women in STEM. I must sound like some sort of grandfather, because I start talking to I try to encourage them to start thinking about the future and about what feeding into their superannuation will allow them to. It will allow them to have security. It will allow them to have choices, and that it's important for them to know that right now the majority of women would not have anywhere near the amount that most men would have. And that's also reflected in the fact that, in Australia now we have a very high proportion of middle-aged women who are either on poverty, homeless, or below the poverty line, because of their life circumstances change, and they are left very, very vulnerable. So I do have a little bit of a script that when I meet these young ladies, they get the talk, because I think it's important that they understand the value of what this will do for them as they move through life, if they have the capacity to do so, of course.
Yeah. I love that, Michael.
I love it.
Yeah,
I think actually, Michael, it's important to acknowledge that you came to this episode actually and listened. I think that's such an important thing. I know it's possibly felt a little bit awkward, but I think it's so important that men turn up, even if it is just to listen. You may not agree with everything we say, but I think it's such a wonderful, welcome thing that you came.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree.
It helps. Look, it helps me. It helps me obviously understand, but it also allows to expand my vocabulary. It allows me to understand the deeper issues that sit behind things. So listening to Anne talk about filling the silence, for a long time I've talked I get frustrated because of the silence. But now listening to someone giving me context around this has helped me temper this frustration that I have. We've got a statement or a question in the chat. I was brought up believing women looked after their men. They did the cooking, the cleaning, etc., while the men did the tough work, like gardening, DIY, sorting the car. At school, it impacted me as it made me scared in classes, such as mental work and woodwork. It was like I was doing something that was dangerous, and it wasn't for women. Those thoughts have gone over in my adulthood, as I live on my own and am having to do the things for the house and garden that I was always discouraged from doing because they were men's work. And it means I've had to learn lots, and it feels really difficult and overwhelming.
Yeah, can empathise with that a lot. Yeah. I did do metal work and woodwork at school because I was determined. I made a fruit bowl and a coat hook, I think, that I remember, and a table that I've still got and still stands up. It's amazing. And I was rubbish at sewing, but I was kind of criticised, I think, for that and judged because I couldn't do the sewing stuff and I hated it. But I'd be quite happy to go and bash some things. People who know me well would not be surprised by that at all. But yeah, the narrative is quite dangerous, isn't it? That genderisation of roles. And I think that's probably quite common. And is that something that you can identify with as well?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I went to an all-girls school and I asked why we didn't have woodwork and car mechanics. And the response was, because you're all girls and you need to know how to cook, clean and sew.
Wow.
And I was like, no, but I'm going to drive a car one day. And what happens if I have a flat tire? There was no response to that. So when I came home and told my father about that, he goes, well, if you've got the strength, go try to change the tire on the car. And of course, I was like 14 and I didn't have the strength. But that was his response. You want to do it? Go do it. But when I went back to school and told my friends that story, they were shocked.
Yeah.
Because it was very much the boys did the hard, tough jobs and the girls were inside the house. And what surprises me is today, I still see that in so many families.
Yeah.
You know, the boys are out mowing the lawns and doing the weeding and doing the gardening, and the girls are inside baking and mopping and cleaning. Great if that's their choice. That's fine. But I always wonder how much of it is choice, how much of it is this is your role.
Yeah. That actually reminds me, that's made me reflect on the fact that when I passed, actually before I passed my driving test, Michael would know this from previous conversations, but I was told that I had to have driving lessons because I didn't drive particularly aggressively because my grandfather and my dad had taught me to drive and was quite happy to drive a bigger car. But once I did pass my test, this sounds wrong, but my grandfather said, right, you're going down to the pit. And the pit actually was a thing in the garage where you could do oil changes and stuff like that. And they were like, okay, you need to know how to fix the car because actually if you get stuck somewhere, this is how you do an oil change. This is in the days when you could do something with the car and it's not all computerized as they are now. And I have no idea where to start on my car, but the point was, this is how to oil change, this is how to change a tyre on a car, and this is how to sort out things like spark plugs, because actually if you get stuck you need to know that because you could be dangerous. But the amount of times I used to go into garages with the car I had at the time, which wasn't particularly reliable, and it would just be like, well, that's going to cost you like £800. And I can remember going to a garage that's no longer around, but not far from my house now, and I had that treatment, and I was just like, no, it's not. It's not going to cost that much because actually it's this, and they're able to prove them right on that because I knew what the problem was. It's just like I couldn't find anyone to fix it. And just walking out of that, and the guy said to me, he said, your surname, he said, you're Len's granddaughter, aren't you? And I said, yes, I am. And it was just like, even then, this sort of like the connection to my grandfather was probably more important than the fact that I actually had owned my own opinion on this and said that no. And I don't think I was that old. I passed my driving test when I was about 18, so I don't know, I must have been in my 20s, if that. But it was just like, dear God. But it was only because I had the knowledge. And like you say, it's important, I think, that we break from those roles. But the opportunity, I think, to do that is still very, very limited. You know, I certainly see as car mechanic courses for women. Yeah, it's a car mechanic course. You know, because what is it about the whole idea that if you're a guy and you're born and you have to be good at mowing and you have to be good at fixing stuff, and what if you're not? I mean, it's a pretty unfair judgment the other way around as well, that you're meant to be, guys are meant to be good at this stuff, but what if you're not? That then creates another label and another kind of story that's unhealthy as well. Yeah,
it's interesting, isn't it? I remember in the 90s going into a pub and
the pints in a pub. Oh, love, you don't want to be doing that, love. Where's your baby sham?
It was ridiculous, wasn't it? Because if you said, "Can I have a beer, please?" they said, "Right, well, you can have a half, but you can't have a pint." And so,
my God!
Halves. Yeah, no, genuinely, that was in the pub, like my local, and that was because I was a woman. But if my mates who were male went up, I'd get a pint. And it's simple things like that, isn't it? It's about, here's your box. Don't come out of that little box. Don't do the mechanic course. Don't do the gardening. Don't do this.
Yeah.
I think it's really tricky.
Walking across the pub with a pint in your hand, and for me, I like darker beers. I'm going in with a dark beer, and you'd walk across, and the eyes follow you across the room until you sat down, and then they'd watch to make sure that you had drunk the pint.
We still
you didn't have a choice not to drink it. You had to drink it, even if you change your mind halfway through, because you just change your mind, or maybe something happened and you need to get home. And whatever reason it was that you didn't drink the pint, but you had to drink it. You have to drink it because there's no choice. Because as a woman, you almost have to prove that point.
But I still get it now. So Jim drinks shorts. But the assumption is Jim will get the pint and I will get the short, the rum and coke or whatever. And then I sort of have to in front of them go, no. It's even simple things like that sometimes, isn't it? It's just the messaging that you're getting is no. You shouldn't be having that. That's not yours.
Yeah.
I think
it's small things.
Bernice, you used a really good term just now, life skills. So a lot of what we're talking about, not the pints, but the other things, car mechanics, all of that, they're life skills. Everybody should know how to do that.
Yeah.
Everybody should know how to cook a simple meal. Everybody should know how to load the dishwasher.
Yeah. It's.
When do we start changing this narrative about gender housework or gender home chores? And it's just life skills, stuff we need to do, stuff we need to learn to do.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. It is. Any closing messages on International Women's Day that we want to share with our audience?
I think for me, I would like to encourage women not to lose their voice, to find people who can be your safe space, who can be your safety net, and mentors who can help you find that voice and to help you have the courage to use that. And for men, I think I echo what you said earlier, Bernie. Learn all you can about how to support the women in your life. Learn how you can be part of creating the change that we all want to see.
I love that. Sarah, anything on your mind about this?
I look forward to the day we don't need it. We don't actually need an International Men or Women's Day. That we are just equal. We don't have to worry about these things.
Yeah. I see you in 99.5 years' time, whatever it was.
If we're still knocking about, we're doing all right, aren't we?
I know. I was just thinking that would be pretty cool. I'm not sure I want to be around in 99.5 years' time.
No.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree with you on that. Michael, what's your takeaway from this?
I've been sitting here reflecting on what you've all been saying about my own behaviour. And one of the things that when I started at the current company I'm in now, had a lot more younger females in it than where I worked previously, which didn't have any. It really opened my eyes to, as men, we need to listen more and not believe that we know best. Because I'm guilty of that sometimes. I'll put my hand up to that. And I try very hard not to be that way. I can see why I'm like that. My sister and I have had some very robust discussions. Not that we're angry with each other, but she talks about the way that we were brought up. And she rebelled against that because my dad was very much, you do the cooking, you do the cleaning, you do this, make me a cup of tea, that sort of stuff. And So much so that they do not have a very close relationship at all. And so I can see the product of that, and she has taken that to a much more extreme. She's a very independent woman, and so I look towards her as a really good role model and a person that I can go to if I need a different opinion and a different viewpoint. Yeah, so yeah, if any guys listen to this, listen, take heed, notice, and be curious as well.
I just want to add on the end, I think there's a really good talk I went to a while ago with Dr. Saab Clare, who's a whistleblower in the NHS, and I think I might have mentioned it on the previous podcast. And she's a parent, and one of her talks is around lift as you climb, and I think that's my kind of thing here, is that actually everyone can lift as we climb and help another woman, help another girl, and that for me is really important. We have a lot of wisdom and we can share it, but I think women can empower women, and there's an awful lot around friendship in that too, but also to recognise that some women may struggle to share their voices, and that's something that I think that we do very well on the podcast and in our community, but I think it's something that everyone can do. I'm so glad that we've managed to do this and with you too. It's brilliant.
Thank you so much. I'm very honoured. It's one of my pet topics, empowering women.
Thanks for listening. We hope you found our conversation with Anne as powerful and impactful as we did. We'd love to hear from you if you found this topic interesting or want to know more about International Women's Day. If you'd like to find out more about our podcast, or you have a great idea for a topic we've not yet covered, or you just want a deeper dive on, we'd love to hear from you. We want this podcast to have as many voices from across our community as possible, so if something's missing or you just want a bit more information, let us know. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter and LinkedIn. You can also become a member of our online community, which is a safe and inclusive space for anyone that's a member of the Childless community. For more details, you can find us at our website on www.thefullstoppod.com. You can also sign up to our listeners list at the website, which keeps you up to date on what we're up to. And if you'd like to, you can also donate to our work too. As always, it's important for us to remind you, you're not alone.
Anne, I've got a question for you.
Thank you.
Hey, Anne.
Yeah.
Next time I'm in Melbourne, can I buy a cup of coffee?
I would love that very, very much.
Okay.
Let me know when you're in town.
Jealous. I'm so jealous.